Welcome to Career and Leadership Real Talk, the no-nonsense guide for ambitious managers who want to have more impact and progress their career. I'm Pamela Langan, a job search coach and expert CV writer specialising in helping frustrated professionals land the jobs and pay rises they know they deserve.
And I'm Jackie Jagger, a leadership and mindset coach specialising in helping newly promoted and new to role leaders to avoid the dickhead trap and lead with confidence. Between us, we've helped hundreds of leaders and managers to find new roles, take ownership of their careers, and handle the challenges that job searches and leadership responsibility inevitably bring. And now we're joining forces to share with you what we know has worked for our clients. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode. Today, we are talking about dealing with disappointment in your job search. And this is a topic that we always try and prepare people for when we are running outplacement workshops under the Catalyst Careers brand, but we know that it is really tough to handle. So if you have been in job search mode for a while and it's not happening in quite the way that you'd want, then this is the episode for you. So Pam, talk to us then about how it can feel when people have been in job search mode for a while. What are some of the feelings and emotions that often come up?
So I think the main one is the feeling of I'm not good enough. When you're not hearing back and when you're getting rejected, you initially go to that place, don't you? Where you're like, I mustn't be good enough, because if I was, then I'd be getting an interview. And I think that's when it starts getting really difficult, because that's when you'll start to feel like your confidence is decreasing and you start to think negatively about your job search. But ultimately, what it comes down to is the fact that you haven't really got any control over that process. So you are applying for those roles. You don't know what's happening on the other side. You don't know what that employer has got going on. You don't know what is going on with the recruiters. You just don't know. And because we haven't got control over that side of the process, that can feel a little bit scary as well. And that can also link in to the feeling of not being good enough, because we just go into overdrive, don't we? When it's not happening, when it feels like we're just trudging through the mud, and when it feels like nobody's getting back to us, it feels tough.
It really does. And I remember when I was in job search mode a good few years ago, and I was applying for things, and there was this real frustration that came about because I was applying for things where I felt like I could do this upside down, inside out, and standing on my head, and still the processes were slow. I wasn't getting feedback. I wasn't hearing back about what was going on. And I remember meeting with a recruiter, and his words were, it's like seeing an animal in the zoo instead of in the wild. And it wasn't great feedback. It was terrible feedback. However, I think what he was describing was that process that when you've been in job search mode for a while, it's disappointing, it's confusing, it knocks your confidence, and you can end up a bit of a shell of your former self, can't you, at that stage?
Yeah. And recently, like in the last couple of weeks, one of my clients got in touch and said, I've applied for this role and they've rejected me. They've told me that I've not got enough of what they need, and that's the end of the road. They haven't got time to give feedback, and it's this email and that's it. And she was really disappointed. In fact, I'd probably say she was disappointed, bordering on being really upset about it, because she knew she could slide into that role. She could make a real impact. But one of the things that I said to her at the time is, how do you know they actually reviewed your application? And she said, because they've sent me this email. And she forwarded me the email where she'd been rejected. And I was like, honestly, this doesn't mean a thing. So she was like, what am I supposed to do? Because I can't go back to them now of being rejected. And she was feeling wounded. I felt she was feeling embarrassed about the fact that she's been rejected when she did have a lot, in fact, pretty much all of what they were looking for. So I said to her, go back and speak to them, go and speak to the hiring manager and ask them, say to them, I know you're super busy And I know that you haven't got time to review all of the applications. However, these are the reasons why I think I was a good match and why I'm aligned to your role. The hiring manager came back within 10 minutes and said, we've not actually seen your application. I've not reviewed it. And I would be happy to put you forward to the next stage. Sometimes, because we've not got control over that process and we don't know what's going on in the background, we don't know how much resources allocated to that recruitment process, they might not be able to read all of the applications. And it might even be that you send them a message and say, what happened? I thought I was a great match, and they still don't get back to you. Sometimes that can happen too. But it's just almost knowing that you're going into this process, you haven't got control over it, but you can control how you feel about it and how those different situations can be handled and dealt with. And you can ask questions, you can get more information, you can speak or try to speak to hiring managers to find out what happens if you do think you're a good match. But the key thing is just knowing that in reality, it's not a reflection on you, because on that occasion, she was a really good match. And when they did see her application, they were like, yes, of course, we're going to interview you. But had she not reached out and had that conversation, she would never have known that. And she would have just had that thought of, I'm not good enough, and felt really disappointed about not getting through to that interview stage.
And it's something we talk about, don't we, within the outplacement work that we do, where we warn people to guard against making meaning of an incomplete story. So in that instance, your client didn't have all the information and she made that mean something about her, which was that she had been rejected, when in reality, the truth of the situation was that her application hadn't been seen by the relevant person. And I think it's so easy for that to happen. When you're in job search mode, it's hard, especially if you are in the situation where you've been made redundant, or the situation where you've had a settlement agreement, where you maybe come to the end of a fixed term contract and you don't have security of income. It's really difficult because that desperation starts to set in, and then you are applying for things. And if you're not hearing back, or you're not hearing what you want to hear in response, then it's very easy to start to make that mean something about you, your capabilities, your applications, when in reality, you just don't have the information to know the true story. So what are some of the things people can do to guard against then? Or if they notice that is what's happening for them, how do they try and get out of that funk? Because it's not the best place to be at when you are applying for future things. You don't then perform at your best if your confidence has been knocked. But it's catch-22, because if that's already happened and your confidence has been knocked, then how do you recover it so that you can show up as your best for future ones? So what advice do you give clients in that situation?
So the key advice, and I think that it's that little voice, isn't it, in your head that says, see, I told you you weren't good enough. And it's really hard to take because you're putting yourself forward. And I always think people put themselves into that process and then they think, we'll just see what happens. And it's almost like spraying and praying, isn't it? You're just putting yourself out there and hoping something comes back. And then when it doesn't happen the way that you want it to, or you get rejected, it's see, told you weren't good enough. And you keep telling yourself that message over and over again. So I think the key things to think about when you're in job search mode and it's not going the way that you want it to go is to think about what you can bring to the table, what you've done, all of the great things that you've done and that you've delivered in recent years. And I always say start with your CV, because a lot of the time, and I'm going to task everyone that's listening to go and get their CV out at some point today or this week and go through your CV, because I guarantee you'll only have about 20-30% of all of the great stuff that you've delivered actually on your CV. So go through your CV, go back through each job that you've ever had and go through and ask yourself, what went well in this job? What did I deliver? What was I really proud of? And start leaning into those things, because it's so easy as humans. We just go straight for the negative. What went wrong? Who didn't like us? Who didn't think we were good at our jobs? Rather than thinking, okay, what did we do? What did we deliver? What are we proud of? And also thinking about how you speak to yourself as well, and catching yourself out when you're saying things to yourself like, I'm stupid, I'm not worthy of this interview, and things like that. Would you say that to your best friend? Would you say that to a friend, or like anybody? Would you say that to a colleague? You wouldn't speak to somebody else a lot of the time the way you speak to yourself. And it's about catching yourself on when you start talking down to yourself, and it's about then going back and leaning in to the good stuff. And then every time you do start rubbishing yourself, or you do start talking negatively, you can go, where's this coming from? Like, where is it actually coming from? Is there any truth to this? Would I speak to somebody else in this way? Where is it coming from? So usually it comes from feeling like a sense of shame or embarrassment or something like that, because maybe you've been rejected from either the initial process or the interview or whatever it is. So it's about thinking about that, just taking a moment. Where does that come from? Or where is that coming from? And analyzing it a little bit. And that's not always easy for us to do, because it's easier to just be like, yeah, you're so stupid. You didn't get through because you're not good enough. Whereas if you go, actually, I am good enough. Maybe I'm just not right for this company. And we're dealing with humans. So you're not going to connect with every human. You're not going to get on with every single person. And that's just life. And it's about thinking through that as well, because we go into these situations and we might have all of the credentials, we might have all of the skills, we might have all of the experience, but then we just don't click with the hiring manager. And that is also okay. You know, you're not going to click with everyone. And a lot of the time the hiring manager is looking for somebody that can hit the ground running in their role, but also somebody that they can get along with and manage. If you're not that person, it's tough, but it's better that they knock you out of that process than they take you through, and then you end up working in a situation where you've got a personality clash. So there's a lot more to it than just getting rejected from the process. So they're the key things. And I think one other thing would be, if you are feeling really disappointed and down about your job search, speak to somebody about it, because when you've got all of those thoughts and feelings bouncing around in your head, you just make them huge. You know, if you've ever watched Inside Out, I absolutely love that film. And I never watch kids' films, but it is literally like, if anybody wants to understand emotions and how your brain works, then Inside Out is the one. But when you let those emotions take control, then you'll come up with all kinds of stories. And it's about going, okay, where's the truth in this? Talk to somebody, get all of the stuff out of your head. When it's in your head, it's huge. When it comes out, it's never usually as bad.
One of the things that I would add to that, which is really important in my eyes, is to choose who you speak to. Because what we see sometimes is people speak to other people in a similar situation, other job seekers who are in that same place of frustration, shame, embarrassment, all of that stuff. And it then spirals the wrong way. So I would add that it's really important to choose somebody who is maybe in the position that you want to be in, somebody who is happy in their role, who will give you a listening ear, but also who will give you that encouragement that there is something on the other side of it. Because the last thing you want, if you're in that low place, is to speak to someone else who's in low energy, who is then going to pull you further into that vortex. How about the situation when, because if I reflect back on how I felt, I don't feel for me it was so much shame or embarrassment or me feeling that I wasn't good enough. The confidence knock came more from, I feel like I am good enough, but I can't seem to get people to realize and take a chance on me. So the confidence knock for me wasn't so much that I didn't feel that I could add value. It was, why are people not seeing this? What's going wrong that I'm not able to articulate this or get it across? Or I might feel like I've had a good interview and I felt like the rapport was really good, but then they go with someone else. What about people that are more in that place of, I can't quite work out what's going on here? They're not so much down on themselves, but there's still that same impact on confidence.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I suppose that is the opposite, isn't it, of feeling the shame and disappointment. And with that, again, it comes down to consistency and building resilience, because you're not going to be right for everyone, even if you have got great rapport with somebody. And we speak to lots of people, don't we, who have gone through that process and they've had a great conversation and they think that job's in the bag, and then it gets offered to somebody else. And that's where thinking about what you've done and delivered is going to be super important, because sometimes what people do in interviews, they have a great connection, but they don't give enough depth around the things that they've delivered and what's really important to those companies. It's almost taking your research to the next level and thinking about the company and what they need to see and hear from you. And it's lovely having that conversation and building that rapport and answering the questions well, but are you actually giving them enough depth? Are you showing them what you can really bring to their company? And a lot of the time, when you don't provide that depth, you leave them slightly unsure. And while they think that person is somebody I can get along with really well, but there's probably a few gaps in their experience. And I would always say, in an interview situation, to ask them, is there anything else that you want to know about my experience? Is there anything I've missed out? And give them the opportunity to have a think about what potentially you've missed, or what they're thinking is a gap in their minds around your experience, because that can really help. Lots of people will just ask questions to find out more about the team or the company or whatever, and they won't ever say, is there anything else about my experience that you want to know? So that is definitely something that you can do to help build that confidence, because if they're giving you that confirmation that there's nothing else that they want to know, then there's nothing else that you could have done. You can walk out of that interview head held high, knowing that you just need to stay consistent with that job search process and something will click.
And I hear sometimes the advice in that situation to ask the question, have you got any doubts about my suitability? And that is a terrible question, because what you're doing then is asking the interviewer to rummage in their mind for doubts. Whereas the way that you framed it of, is there anything else that you need to hear from me about my experience, looks for gaps that you can then fill. The other thing I would say with that situation, having experienced it, is that it's very easy, if you are in that place of being frustrated, of feeling that people aren't getting it, they're not getting me, they're not getting what I could bring, is that it's very easy to take the baggage of that into the next opportunity. And it's so important to get yourself into a state of positive expectation of, I'm looking forward to meeting this new person. This could be the one. The reason that the others haven't come off is because there's something out there that's better for me. If you could approach each new conversation, whether that's with a recruiter or a hiring manager or a further stage interview, with that attitude of, this could be the thing, let's go and explore it, and with curiosity to find out more, then you have that positive expectation, as opposed to bringing the baggage of, I can go through the motions again, but it's probably just going to happen again. And I think subconsciously you have to recognize that those things do leak out. And when I reflect back, that was definitely some of what was happening in my situation, where I'd had a couple of things that I knew that I was more than qualified for, and they didn't come off. So then I was going into others and taking the baggage into those new opportunities. So that is advice for previous me, is as to how to avoid. And I think finally, it's important to talk about, so the phrasing that we always talk about on our workshops is commit to the process and detach from the outcome. So explain what that phrasing means and why we stress that so much to people.
So that, and I was just going to say, actually, when you were talking about curiosity, that links in really nicely with that, doesn't it? Because if you go into every interview being curious, using it as a learning experience, and not going in there with your eye on the prize, thinking about the offer, if you go in and think, what can I actually learn from this process? You're going to feel so much calmer in that interview. You'll be able to reach the depths of your mind so that you can articulate the experience and the things that you can bring so much more easily. And if you move away from that outcome and you're just like, what am I learning? What am I learning about them? What am I learning about me? And you're taking that away to use that for future interviews, whether it's with this company or another company, what you'll find is that the job offers will come much more easily, because as soon as you take your eye off the prize and you're like, this is all about learning for me. And it might seem like it's your dream job, and you might be thinking, oh my God, I need to get this job. This is the one and the only. This is where you need to take a step back and go, okay, I'm going into this process and I'm going to learn. I'm going to learn about myself. I'm going to learn about them. And actually, I'm going to see if it is the right one for me. On paper, right now, it feels like it's the dream job, but I'm going to put that to one side. And I'm just going to think about what I'm going to learn in this process. And I guarantee if you do that, you're more likely to get the job offer. And I usually say to people, have a few interviews before you go for that one that you would class as your dream job, for some practice, because when you're talking through those answers, how they come out of your mouth is never usually how they're positioned in your mind. And we know this from podcasting. So you need to have a few practice runs. Now, I always find that when I send clients into those situations, when I say, get yourself a couple of interviews lined up, we're going to practice, we're going to do some live interview prep and all of that kind of stuff, 9 times out of 10, they're going to get those offers, because they're not bothered about that, because they're going into it as a learning experience. So there's definitely something to learn from that. Take the pressure off yourself. Go in thinking, what can I learn? They will learn more about you. You will learn more about them. You have got more chance of getting the offer. And I think that when you talk about detaching from the outcome, that's exactly it, isn't it?
And I think even at the earlier stages, it's also commit to the process, detach from the outcome applies equally if you're in those stages where you feel like your CV is going into a black hole. Because again, there's so much that can go on behind the scenes. You don't know how many applications they've got. Sometimes a vacancy might be closed. Sometimes it might have gone to an internal candidate. You just do not know what's going on behind the scenes. And the general situation for most good candidates is that they might apply for 10 roles, maybe have 2 or 3 interviews. If they are good at that point, then maybe out of 2 or 3 interviews might get 1. And that is for a really good candidate. So you've got to commit to applying for roles and not pin your hopes on something, because you've got to recognize that all of that stuff that can go on behind the scenes, you can't control. You've just got to let go of it and play the numbers. So I think it's also for those of you that are in that situation where you're feeling more of that, then you just keep going. You just keep applying. And quite clearly, Pam is the expert at this. So if you are in that situation where you have been applying for a long time, or where you've had some really good interviews and they just haven't gone anywhere, then Pam's Job Search Accelerator is a brilliant opportunity to work one-to-one with her to support you in that place. And I think very often it's that hand-holding and that understanding that people need at that point. And it's small tweaks that can make the difference, isn't it, at that point?
Yeah, I think when you're almost like out there and you're in that space of interviewing, those little knockbacks and things like that, especially if you can't bounce off family members and friends and things like that, you just need that person that dust you off and get you back in the race, and it's come on, carry on. And that's where you're going to build resilience, and that's where you're going to get the right job offer.
Absolutely. So if you need that support, then do drop Pam a message and we'll pop the link to the Job Search Accelerator information in with the show notes. Equally, if you are responsible for an organisation where you know that people will be going into job search through organisational redesign, structure changes, redundancies might be happening, then under the Catalyst Careers brand, we can offer both one-to-one and group support for those who are at risk of redundancy or who've been on the receiving end of a settlement agreement. Do get in touch if you need that for your organisation as well. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. As ever, if you have found it useful, or if you know that there's somebody else who's in the situation where they would find it useful, then please do share it, and please do rate and review on whatever podcast platform you've been listening to us on. We'll be back with another episode next week, so catch you then. Exciting news from us. If you're an ambitious leader or manager earning 50k or more and you're ready to take your career to the next level, we have an opportunity for you. Introducing Catalyst Career Club, your secret weapon for unlocking career success. As a member, you'll get access to monthly live training sessions, exclusive job opportunities, and the ability to get personalised advice from us on your toughest career challenges.
We've helped thousands of driven leaders like you secure significant pay rises, land dream roles, and thrive in their careers. And now we want to support you in achieving your most ambitious career goals too. Membership is just $6.99 per month with no contract or tie-in. And as a special bonus for being our podcast listeners, you can use the code podcast at checkout to get your first month for just £1. Head over to pamelalangan.com/Catalyst Career Club to sign up now, and we'll see you inside.